Giovanni was 71 when the quiet war with his nights truly began. He had always been a man who carried his days with dignity, tending his small backyard garden, walking down the cobblestone streets of his Italian town, and ending evenings with a cup of tea and soft music. But lately, his nights betrayed him. He would slip into bed, sink into the warmth of the sheets, only to be startled awake at 2 a.m. It became so predictable that he began to dread the darkness itself. His eyes would open, the silence pressing in, and there he was, alone with his thoughts, staring at the ceiling, wishing for a sleep that no longer belonged to him. At first, he convinced himself it was nothing. "It's just age," he muttered to his wife Lucia, forcing a smile she didn't believe. But deep inside, fear had already set its hooks. Giovanni had always prided himself on being strong, dependable, the one his children and grandchildren could lean on. Yet now, something as simple as sleep, something he had taken for granted all his life, was slipping through his fingers. Night after night, he woke up restless, his body weary, his spirit bruised. And the cruelest part of all? He couldn't understand why. He drank water before bed, believing it was the healthy thing to do. But instead of rest, it seemed only to deliver him to more frustration. Lucia noticed the change before Giovanni would admit it. She saw the way he dragged his feet in the mornings, how his patience frayed more easily, how his once bright eyes seemed dulled by fatigue. "You're not yourself anymore," she whispered one morning, her hand gently brushing his arm. He nodded but said nothing, because how could he explain the quiet dread he felt each night, knowing it would happen again? There was no fever, no injury, nothing he could point to, just a body that no longer listened, and a mind that refused to rest. It was an invisible thief, robbing him of peace. The turning point came one late evening when Giovanni sat at the edge of the bed, his head buried in his hands. The clock read 3 a.m., and he hadn't slept more than an hour all night. His heart pounded in his chest, not from exertion, but from the heavy awareness that something deeper was wrong. He whispered a prayer into the darkness, a plea that felt desperate. "Lord, just give me rest." For the first time, the weight of it brought tears to his eyes. He was not a man who cried easily, but that night he wept softly, afraid of what this sleeplessness might mean for the rest of his days. The next morning, he confessed to Lucia how much the nights had been tormenting him. She listened quietly, her eyes full of concern, and then placed a warm cup of chamomile tea in his hands. "Maybe your body needs something gentler," she said. That single act, so small, so ordinary, stirred something in Giovanni. He realized that he had been battling the nights with nothing but stubbornness and plain water, never once considering that perhaps his body, older now, needed more than habit. That realization, though painful, cracked open a door of hope. Maybe the answer wasn't in forcing sleep, but in learning to support it. Giovanni began paying closer attention to his evenings. He noticed how water left him shivering in the cool of the night, how it filled his bladder and dragged him out of precious slumber. He thought about the way his body had changed with age, the slower recovery, the stiffer joints, the heavier thoughts. And he wondered if sleep, too, required a new kind of care. Each night became a test of patience and awareness. He replaced his glass of water with warm drinks that carried not just comfort, but something deeper. Nutrients, calm, warmth that lingered in his bones. At first, the difference was subtle, a little less tossing, a little more quiet drifting. He still woke in the night, but not with the same jolt of urgency. The minutes stretched longer, and the rest felt softer. He could sense his body responding, as though it had been waiting for this small kindness all along. Giovanni didn't tell anyone right away. He kept it to himself, like a secret experiment, afraid to hope too much. But one morning, when the sunlight touched the curtains, he realized he had slept nearly 6 hours without interruption. It felt like a miracle. He sat up in bed, rubbing his eyes, and for the first time in months, smiled at the morning. What surprised him most was not just the sleep itself, but the way it changed his days. He found himself humming again as he watered the garden, his steps lighter, his patience restored. Lucia noticed too. "Your eyes," she said one afternoon, "they're bright again." He laughed softly, brushing the soil from his hands, and replied, "I think I finally found what I was missing. It wasn't a pill or a drastic change, but something much simpler, a gentle shift in how he cared for himself at night." That small discovery became the thread of a larger journey, one that showed him aging wasn't a surrender, but an invitation to listen more closely to his body. Giovanni's story isn't about a miracle cure. It's about the quiet courage it takes to face what feels unchangeable, to look at a struggle with new eyes, and to try again. His nights are not perfect. Some evenings, the old restlessness still returns, and he lies awake for a while. But now he carries something he didn't before, a sense of partnership with his body, a trust that even small choices can bring back peace. And with each passing night, he learns that rest is not just the absence of wakefulness, but the presence of care, patience, and tenderness. As I tell you this, I want you to imagine Giovanni, not just as a man battling sleeplessness, but as someone who discovered a hidden gentleness waiting for him in the simplest of changes. His journey begins here, with nights of fear and fatigue, but it does not end there. It moves toward something brighter, something that promises hope for anyone who has ever stared at the ceiling at 2 a.m., longing for peace. And if Giovanni could find his way back to restful sleep, so can you. Giovanni had always believed nights were meant for silence, for dreams, for the soft rhythm of breathing beside the woman he loved. Yet, more and more often, he found himself waking at 2 a.m., staring into the dark, his heart heavy with frustration. The pattern became a cruel joke. Just when the world seemed most still, his body betrayed him. He would swing his legs over the side of the bed, pressing his palms against his knees, sighing deeply. The quiet was suffocating. His wife Lucia slept gently on the other side, her breathing steady, while Giovanni sat in the shadows, wide awake, burdened by the weight of exhaustion. At first he thought it was nothing unusual, a little thirst perhaps, a sign of age certainly. But as weeks turned into months, those early awakenings gnawed at him, draining his spirit little by little. He was 71, a man who had lived through hardship, who had built a life with his bare hands and steady will. But sleeplessness was different. It was not a problem he could fix with effort or endurance. It crept into his days, making him short-tempered, dimming the sparkle in his eyes, leaving him weary even before noon. He missed the simple joy of greeting the morning with energy, of stepping into his garden with a clear head and strong body. Lucia noticed the change before Giovanni admitted it. She would watch him struggle with his shoelaces, moving slower than usual, his hands heavy as if even simple tasks demanded too much. One morning, as he sat at the breakfast table staring into his coffee, she touched his wrist and asked softly, "Are you all right, Gio?" He smiled, that familiar protective smile meant to shield her from worry, but she saw through it. "You're not yourself," she whispered, her eyes filled with quiet concern. And he knew she was right. He was living in a fog, and no matter how hard he tried to push through it, the nights kept pulling him back into exhaustion. The real breaking point came after a particularly restless night. Giovanni had woken at 2, then at 3:30, then again before dawn. Each time, he shuffled to the bathroom, convinced that the glass of water he drank before bed had caused the problem. But even when he tried skipping it, the waking continued. That morning, as the sun broke over the rooftops, Giovanni stood at the window feeling hollow. His hands trembled slightly as he held onto the sill, and a deep sadness welled inside him. For the first time, he felt old, not in the way birthdays reminded him, but in the way his body no longer obeyed him. It was a quiet, cutting grief. Later that week, he found himself at the doctor's office, not because of sleep, but because of fatigue that lingered like a heavy cloak. The doctor, a kind man with graying temples, listened carefully. "Giovanni," he said gently, "sleep is not a luxury at your age, it's a foundation. Without it, everything else begins to crumble." Those words struck Giovanni like a hammer. He had always seen sleep as something natural, something given freely. Now he realized it was something fragile, something he had to protect. The doctor explained that as the body ages, its rhythms change. Water before bed may not help. It may even disturb. Hormones that once held everything in balance had grown weaker, and the body demanded new kinds of care. Giovanni drove home that afternoon in silence, his mind heavy with the doctor's words. Lucia waited at the kitchen table with a steaming pot of soup. When he told her what the doctor said, she reached across and held his hand. "Then maybe it's time we learn new ways," she said. Her voice was steady, her eyes kind. That moment stirred something in Giovanni. Perhaps this was not a defeat, but a turning point. Perhaps the restless nights were not the end of his vitality, but an invitation to change, to rediscover balance in a different way. That evening, Giovanni decided to observe himself with new eyes. He noticed how cold water seemed to tighten his stomach, how quickly it filled his bladder. He noticed the tension in his shoulders as he lay awake, the restless thoughts that spun in circles. He began to wonder if his body was asking for something he had overlooked. He remembered the doctor's words, not a luxury, but a foundation. and thought about what foundations were built on: care, patience, the right materials. Maybe sleep was no different. Maybe he needed to rebuild his nights, one small choice at a time. That night, when the clock neared bedtime, Giovanni set aside his glass of plain water. Instead, Lucia handed him a warm drink, something gentle, something soothing. He hesitated at first, doubtful that such a simple change could alter what had become such a deep struggle. But he sipped slowly, letting the warmth spread through him. It wasn't a miracle. He still woke once, glancing at the clock in the early hours. But he noticed something. His body felt calmer, less jolted. The waking was softer, and slipping back to sleep came easier. It was a glimmer of hope, small but undeniable. Over the next few days, Giovanni continued experimenting quietly. He found that evenings felt different when he treated them as a time of preparation rather than resignation. He dimmed the lights earlier, listened to soft music, allowed himself to move slower. And each time he replaced water with something warm and nourishing, he felt a subtle shift. It wasn't the instant, unbroken sleep he longed for, but it was a step toward peace. And peace, he realized, was worth everything. As Giovanni sat in his garden one morning, watching the sun rise over his tomato plants, he smiled for the first time in weeks. He still felt tired, but there was a softness in him, a sense that he was no longer powerless. Maybe tonight will be better, he thought, and for once he believed it. The war with his nights was not over, but the battle had turned. He was no longer just enduring, he was learning. And in that learning, he found something he thought he had lost: hope. Giovanni had never questioned the ritual of keeping a small glass of water at his bedside. It was a habit carried over from his younger years when thirst struck at midnight or after a long day of tending vines in his cousin's vineyard. Water, he always believed, was the safest, purest thing a man could give his body, and so every evening, just before pulling the covers up to his chest, he would drink. It felt healthy, almost virtuous. But in the deep of night, when he found himself awake at 2 or 3 o'clock, his bladder pulling him to the bathroom yet again, he began to wonder if that simple glass of water had become his quiet enemy. He remembered one particular night in early spring. The rain tapped softly against the roof tiles and the air carried a chill. Giovanni had fallen asleep easily after sipping his usual water, but within hours he was awake, heart pounding, the urge to relieve himself impossible to ignore. He shuffled through the dark, slippers brushing the floor, and returned to bed with a sigh. By the time he lay down again, the spell of sleep had vanished. His mind, once calm, began racing with old memories, unfinished tasks, and worries about tomorrow. He turned on his side, then his back, then his other side, but the rest he craved never returned. When morning finally came, he felt hollowed out, as if the night had stolen more than just sleep. It had stolen his strength. Lucia watched him struggle through breakfast that day. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted his cup, and his eyes were ringed with shadows. "Giovanni," she said softly, "maybe it is the water." He frowned. "Water? Impossible. Water is life." But her words stayed with him, echoing in the quiet hours when he lay awake. Could it be that something so simple, so essential, was working against him now that his body had grown older? The thought unsettled him. Later that week, Giovanni returned to see his doctor, still troubled by the restless nights. When he explained his evening habit, the doctor leaned back in his chair and nodded knowingly. "It's not uncommon, Giovanni," he said. "As we age, our bodies change. The hormone that once helped us retain water during the night, vasopressin, declines. That means even a small glass can fill your bladder quickly. The result? Your body wakes you earlier, and once you're awake, it's harder to fall asleep again." Giovanni listened, his brows knit. The doctor continued, "Water itself isn't bad, of course, but at night, plain water doesn't give you anything your body needs for sleep. No warmth, no nutrients, nothing to calm your nerves, just liquid and a signal to your bladder." Those words felt like a betrayal of everything Giovanni had believed. He drove home in silence, staring at the road, his thoughts heavy. He thought about all the years he had trusted water, the countless times he had told his children and grandchildren, "Drink plenty, it's the best medicine." And yet, here he was, betrayed by the very thing he had praised. He felt almost foolish, as if age had tricked him, turning wisdom into weakness. But beneath the sting of pride, he also felt a stirring of relief. At last, there was a reason, an explanation for his suffering. It wasn't just his imagination. Something real had changed. That evening, as Giovanni sat at the table with Lucia, he told her what the doctor had explained. She listened quietly, her eyes soft, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "So perhaps," she said gently, "the water that once helped you now needs to be replaced with something else. Your body is asking for a different kind of care." Giovanni nodded slowly, the words sinking in. He looked at the familiar glass on the counter and felt, for the first time, a sense of distance from it. It wasn't betrayal, he realized, it was transition. His body was no longer the same as it had been at 40 or 50, and maybe that wasn't something to resent, but something to accept with grace. That night, Giovanni tried something new. Instead of his usual water, Lucia warmed a small cup of almond milk. He held it carefully in his hands, feeling the heat seep into his palms. The first sip surprised him, gentle, soothing, almost sweet, though unsweetened. It filled him in a way water never had, wrapping him in a sense of calm. He finished the cup slowly, brushed his teeth, and lay down with a cautious hope. When he woke the next morning, the clock read 6. He had stirred once in the night, but not with the same urgency, not with the same sharp disruption. For the first time in weeks, he felt rested. Over the following days, Giovanni began to see plain water in a new light. It was still precious, still essential, but it belonged to the daylight, not the night. In the mornings, he drank deeply, letting it cleanse and refresh him. In the afternoons, he carried a bottle as he worked in the garden. But as dusk settled, he chose differently. Warm drinks that carried more than hydration, that offered comfort and nourishment. Each evening, the ritual became less about thirst and more about preparation, a gentle reminder that his body needed new rhythms now. He told his daughter one Sunday afternoon as they sat together watching the grandchildren play. "Do you know," he said, smiling faintly, "I think water has been tricking me. I thought it was helping, but it was keeping me awake." She laughed softly, squeezing his shoulder. "Papa, even water has its time and place." Her words eased him. It wasn't betrayal, after all. It was simply life asking him to adapt. Giovanni still kept a glass of water nearby, out of habit, but he rarely touched it at night anymore. When he reached for something before bed, it was with intention. A warm cup, a soothing sip, a choice that honored his changing body. And with each small decision, he felt a growing sense of peace. Sleep no longer felt like a battle he was destined to lose. Instead, it felt like a relationship he was slowly mending, one gentle night at a time. As the weeks passed, Giovanni began to understand something deeper. Aging wasn't about giving up the things he loved. It was about learning new ways to meet the needs of his body. Water had not betrayed him. It had simply stepped aside, making room for something else. And in that realization, he found not loss, but wisdom. He looked at Lucia one evening as they shared their warm drinks before bed and whispered, "Perhaps the secret to sleeping well is not fighting change, but welcoming it." She smiled, and in her eyes he saw agreement, but also pride. Giovanni had not only found rest, he had found acceptance. Giovanni had always thought of sleep as a switch. Either it came or it didn't, like the flick of a light. But after the doctor's words about water and the night spent sipping Lucia's warm drinks, he began to see it differently. Sleep, he realized, was more like a garden, something that needed tending, nourishment, and care. And just as a tomato plant would wither without the right soil or sunlight, his nights withered without the right support. That thought opened a new question in his mind. What exactly was his body missing when he lay awake, restless and weary? The answer came one afternoon at the market. Giovanni was strolling between stalls, his hands behind his back, breathing in the smell of fresh herbs and ripe fruit. He paused at the booth of an old acquaintance, Marco, who sold dried goods and spices. Marco was a man of endless stories, always eager to share. That day, as Giovanni mentioned his struggles with sleep, Marco leaned in and said, Gio, sometimes the body isn't restless because it wants less. It's restless because it wants more. Not more water, but more of what water cannot give. Minerals, warmth, little things that calm the nerves." The words lingered. That evening, Giovanni sat with Lucia at the table and repeated what Marco had told him. She nodded thoughtfully, her hands folded neatly. "It makes sense," she said. "Our bodies are not just machines to be filled with liquid. They are living, delicate things that need the right kind of fuel. Maybe what you're missing isn't sleep itself, but the pieces that allow sleep to come." She looked at him tenderly. "Have you ever thought your nights might be hungry?" Giovanni chuckled at her phrasing, but the idea struck him. Hungry nights. Yes, that was exactly what they felt like. Empty, longing for something unseen. The next morning, Giovanni returned to the doctor, more curious than before. "Tell me," he asked, "what do you mean when you say my body changes with age? What is it missing now?" The doctor smiled patiently, as if glad to see Giovanni's growing openness. "As we age," he explained, "our stores of certain nutrients decline. Magnesium, for instance, which calms the nervous system. Glycine, an amino acid that helps the brain slow down. Even tryptophan, which your body uses to make melatonin, the hormone of sleep. Without these, it's not that you cannot sleep, but that your body cannot enter the deeper, more restful stages as easily. That's why plain water doesn't help. It carries none of these." The words painted a picture in Giovanni's mind. He could almost see his body searching for those missing keys each night, fumbling in the dark, unable to unlock the door to rest. And he thought back to the almond milk, the way it had soothed him, how different it felt compared to water. Perhaps it wasn't just comfort, but nourishment, the missing pieces sliding back into place. For the first time, he understood. His sleeplessness wasn't a curse, but a signal. His body was calling out for what it no longer produced in abundance. That evening, Lucia prepared another warm cup for him, sprinkling a little cinnamon on top. Giovanni watched her as she stirred, her movements gentle, deliberate, as if she were stirring not just a drink, but hope itself. When he sipped, he imagined the magnesium flowing through him, the tryptophan softening the edges of his thoughts, the glycine whispering to his restless mind. It was a comfort not only of the body, but of the imagination, to believe that what he was missing could be restored, even in small sips. He lay down that night with less resistance, less fear, and more trust. The difference was subtle, but real. He noticed that his dreams returned, vivid, colorful fragments he hadn't experienced in months. He woke with them lingering at the edges of his mind, like visitors who had been waiting to be let in. "I dreamed again," he told Lucia one morning, almost in disbelief. She smiled warmly. "Then your body is finding what it needed." The words filled him with quiet joy. Dreams, he realized, were not just stories of the night. They were proof of deep rest, of the body's willingness to restore itself. As weeks passed, Giovanni grew more intentional about how he treated his evenings. He added small touches, an earlier dinner, a slower walk after sunset, soft music instead of television. Each change felt like another piece of nourishment, another way of telling his body, "I am listening to you now." The restlessness did not vanish completely, but it softened, like a storm losing its strength. And with every night of deeper sleep, he felt his days return to him. Lighter steps, clearer thoughts, more patience for his grandchildren's endless questions. One afternoon, while watching his grandson build a tower of wooden blocks, Giovanni felt something he hadn't in a long while: steadiness. The tower wobbled precariously, and the boy looked up, wide-eyed, waiting for guidance. Giovanni reached out, steadying the blocks with a firm but gentle hand. "Patience," he said softly, smiling. And he realized the word wasn't just for the child, it was for himself too. His nights were teaching him patience, showing him that healing did not come in sudden floods, but in slow, nourishing streams. He began sharing his experience quietly with friends at the cafe. Men his age, who often complained of sleeplessness, leaned closer when Giovanni spoke. "It's not just the sleep," he told them, "it's what your body is missing. Find the right way to feed your nights, not just your days." They nodded, intrigued, some skeptical, but Giovanni didn't push. He had learned that change comes gently, as it did for him, one sip at a time. At home, Lucia watched him with quiet pride. She saw the way his shoulders no longer slumped as much, the way he laughed more easily, the way his eyes carried light again. "You are yourself again," she said one evening, resting her head on his shoulder. Giovanni kissed her hair and whispered, "Maybe I just needed to remember that even nights must be fed." She laughed softly at his poetic turn, but she understood. Giovanni's journey was far from over, but he had uncovered a truth that carried him forward. Sleep was not lost forever, only waiting for him to give back what age had taken away. His nights were no longer empty halls of frustration. They were becoming gardens again, slowly, carefully, as he restored the missing nutrients his body craved. And in that garden, Giovanni found not only rest, but renewal. For most of his life, Giovanni had thought of aging as something that happened to other people. Even as his hair turned white and his steps grew slower, he still felt like the same man inside, the one who once carried heavy crates of olives across the village square, who danced with Lucia under the stars, who stayed up late talking with friends until dawn. But the restless nights had made him realize that age was not just a number. It was a tide that moved quietly, reshaping the shores of his body and mind in ways he hadn't noticed until sleep slipped through his grasp. One morning, after another night of broken rest, Giovanni sat in the doctor's office again. The physician leaned forward, speaking gently but firmly. "Giovanni, as we grow older, things inside us change. The hormones that once kept your body steady, melatonin, vasopressin, they begin to decline. Your bladder grows more sensitive, your nerves less patient. Sleep does not come the way it used to because the very rhythm of your body is shifting." Giovanni listened, a knot tightening in his chest. He had known he was older, of course, but hearing it laid out like that, hormones declining, rhythms fading, felt like someone holding a mirror up to his vulnerability. Driving home, Giovanni couldn't shake the thought. All his life, he had believed strength meant pushing through, enduring without complaint. But now, no amount of stubbornness could restore the things age had quietly taken. That evening, sitting at the kitchen table, he confessed to Lucia. "The doctor says my body isn't the same anymore. I cannot hold water through the night. My hormones, my balance, they are weaker now." His voice broke slightly and he lowered his gaze, ashamed of sounding fragile. But Lucia reached across the table, her warm hand covering his. "Gio," she said softly, "you are still strong, but even strong men must learn to live differently with time. This isn't weakness, it's wisdom waiting for you." Her words lingered as he lay in bed that night. He realized that his frustration had been fueled not only by sleeplessness, but by denial. He had wanted his body to behave as it had at 50, at 60, but 71 was different. The nights were teaching him that he could not cling to the past, no matter how tightly he tried. Aging was not a thief in the night, it was a teacher, though often a harsh one, and if he listened, perhaps he could find a gentler way forward. The next day, Giovanni sat in his garden thinking. The olive tree he had planted as a young man stood tall, though its bark was rougher now, its branches slower to bud. And yet, it still gave fruit, not the way it once did, but in its own time, in its own rhythm. He realized then that his body was no different. The seasons had changed, but life remained, if only he could adapt to its pace. "I must stop fighting myself," he whispered, brushing soil from his hands. "I must learn to live with what is, not what was." That evening, he spoke openly with his daughter when she came to visit. "I wake because of age, not only habit," he told her. She looked at him with tenderness. "Papa, that is true, but age does not mean the end of joy. It means we must be kinder to ourselves. You gave us strength when we were young. Now you must give yourself gentleness." Her words moved him, filling a place in his heart he hadn't realized was empty. Perhaps his children, now grown, were his mirrors too, reminding him that he deserved the same care he had given to them. In the weeks that followed, Giovanni began adjusting with more acceptance. He no longer cursed the bathroom trips in the night, but treated them as part of the new rhythm of life. He learned to prepare earlier, to drink wisely, to choose warmth over cold. Each change felt like a small negotiation with age, an agreement that he would no longer resist what was inevitable, but instead find ways to live in harmony with it. And slowly, the bitterness in him softened. One evening, after finishing a modest supper of soup and bread, Giovanni sat with Lucia in the glow of a single lamp. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think age only took from us, but perhaps it gives too. It gives us time to slow down, to notice more, to listen more closely." Lucia smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Yes, Gio, and it gives us the chance to discover new ways of caring for ourselves and each other." That night, as Giovanni lay in bed, he felt the truth of her words. The room was quiet, the air cool, the warmth of his evening drink still lingering in his body. He knew he might wake again, but he no longer feared it the way he once did. He understood now that aging had changed the rules, and fighting those changes only deepened the struggle. Accepting them, however, opened the door to peace. Sleep, he realized, was not just about the body, it was about surrendering, allowing, trusting. And so, when he finally drifted into slumber, it was with a softer heart. He dreamed of his younger days, of carrying olives under the sun, of dancing with Lucia when they were first in love. But this time, when he woke, it was not with anger or despair. It was with gratitude. Even in broken hours, life still offered him rest, and he was learning night by night to receive it. Giovanni once thought the battle with his nights was between him and water itself. But as the days passed, and as he listened more carefully to the doctor's words and Lucia's gentle reminders, he began to realize that water was not the enemy. It was not water itself that betrayed him, but the timing and the way it arrived in his body. "It's not the water," he murmured one evening to Lucia, swirling a small cup of warm milk in his hands. "It's the wrong kind." The idea seemed strange at first. How could water, the most innocent of things, become the culprit? But Giovanni had begun to notice a pattern. Plain water, taken cold and late, jolted his system. It rushed straight to his bladder, chilled his stomach, and left his body restless instead of soothed. Yet when he replaced it with something warm, something nourishing, the night unfolded differently. He could feel his muscles easing, his breath deepening. It wasn't just hydration, it was comfort. It was a signal to his body that it was safe to let go. One afternoon, as he sat at the cafe with a few old friends, Giovanni decided to share his discovery. They were men like him, well into their 60s and 70s, each with their own quiet struggles. "I used to think my problem was water," Giovanni began, sipping slowly from his espresso. "But it wasn't. It was the way I drank it. And when? Plain water gave me nothing my body needed for sleep. But warm drinks, milk, broth, tea, they carry something else. They tell the body to rest." His friends looked skeptical at first, but then one of them, Pietro, nodded thoughtfully. "My wife says the same. She always drinks chamomile before bed, and she sleeps like a child. Perhaps we should listen more to them, eh?" They laughed, but Giovanni could see curiosity flicker in their eyes. That night, Giovanni experimented again. He poured himself a small cup of coconut water, gently warmed, just as Marco at the market had suggested earlier. At first, he hesitated. He had always thought of coconut water as a summer drink, something to cool you on hot days. But warm, diluted, it felt different, softer. As he sipped, he imagined the minerals seeping into his tired muscles, easing the twitch in his legs, calming the nerves that had kept him awake for months. By the time he lay down, there was a sense of calm that surprised him. He still stirred once in the early hours, but the urgency was gone. His bladder remained quiet, his body steady. He drifted back into sleep without the storm of thoughts that usually greeted him. The next morning, Giovanni stood in the kitchen with a lightness he hadn't felt in a long while. "It wasn't the water," he told Lucia with quiet triumph. "It was the wrong kind. My body needed more." She smiled knowingly, as if she had suspected this all along. "Your body is wiser than you think, Gio. You only had to listen." Her words filled him with warmth deeper than the drink itself. For the first time, he felt he was not at war with his body, but in conversation with it, learning its new language. As days passed, Giovanni embraced the idea more fully. He began to see his evenings not as a countdown to sleeplessness, but as a gentle ritual, a time to choose wisely what he would offer his body. Sometimes it was almond milk, with its hidden strength of magnesium and tryptophan. Other nights, chamomile tea, its floral scent carrying him into calm. On colder evenings, bone broth, rich and grounding, whispering comfort to his joints and muscles. Each choice felt like a small gift, a promise that he was not neglecting himself but nourishing what age had taken away. He noticed how even the act of preparation mattered. Warming the drink, holding the cup in his hands, breathing in the steam, it all became part of the ritual. It was not only about the nutrients, but about slowing down, signaling to his mind and body that the day was done, that it was time to surrender to rest. This slowing, this mindfulness became as healing as the drink itself. One evening, his granddaughter Sophia came to visit. She was 12, curious and full of questions, always watching her grandfather with wide eyes. She noticed the small cup in his hand and asked, No, why don't you drink water at night?" Giovanni smiled, pulling her close. "Because, little one, my body asks for something different now. Water is good in the day, but at night I need warmth, something that tells me I can rest." She tilted her head, thoughtful, then whispered, "Like a lullaby for your body?" Giovanni chuckled, kissing the top of her head. Yes, exactly, a lullaby. Her words stayed with him. A lullaby, that was what these drinks had become. Not just liquid, but gentle songs for his body, soothing him into slumber. And with that image, he no longer saw water as a betrayal, but as a friend who had simply stepped aside, making room for new companions. He carried this thought with him, and each night he chose his drink with gratitude, not resentment. By now, Giovanni's nights were not perfect, but they were transformed. The anger, the despair, the helplessness that had once haunted him were replaced by patience, hope, and a quiet trust in the wisdom of small changes. He no longer cursed the 2 a.m. hour if it came, because he knew he had given himself the best chance for peace. And often, to his surprise, he found that the hour passed unnoticed, his body finally resting, his dreams returning. Lucia noticed the change too. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, she took his hand and said, "You are brighter again, Gio. You laugh more, you sing when you work in the garden. I think you have found your way back to yourself." Giovanni looked at her, his heart swelling with love and gratitude. "Maybe," he said softly, "all it took was realizing it wasn't water's fault. It was simply the wrong kind of care." And in that realization, Giovanni found not only rest, but wisdom. Aging, he understood now, was not about losing, but about learning the subtle ways his body spoke, learning the new paths toward peace. And each night, with a small, warm cup in his hands, he listened. Giovanni had always believed that life's biggest changes came from great effort, years of work, sacrifices made, heavy burdens carried. Yet, in these recent weeks, he discovered something surprising. Relief, at least in the matter of sleep, didn't demand enormous effort or painful discipline. It came instead from a single, small swap, a glass of water set aside replaced with something warmer, kinder, more suited to the man he had become. That simple exchange, so modest on the surface, had begun to shift the shape of his nights. It was one evening in particular that sealed this truth for him. The day had been long. He had spent the afternoon trimming the hedges and pulling weeds, his back aching with the familiar stiffness that came with age. By the time dinner ended, he felt heavy, ready for bed. Normally, he would have poured himself a glass of water before slipping under the covers, but now he reached instead for almond milk, warming it gently on the stove. He stirred in a pinch of cinnamon, just as Lucia suggested, and sat quietly at the table as the warmth spread through his chest. It felt unremarkable, almost too simple. Yet that night, Giovanni woke only once, and when he did, his body slipped back into rest without struggle. In the morning, he found himself humming as he tied his shoes. The relief was not dramatic. It wasn't as though one drink cured years of restless nights, but it was real. He could feel the difference in his bones, in the clarity of his mind, in the softness of his mood. He found himself less irritable with the grandchildren, more patient with the slow pace of his chores. Even Lucia noticed. "You smile more these days," she told him one afternoon as they worked side by side in the garden. Giovanni looked at her, the sun glinting off her silver hair, and realized she was right. Something in him had softened, as though the night had finally stopped draining his spirit. One evening, Giovanni shared his discovery with his friend Pietro at the cafe. Pietro, skeptical as always, frowned. "So you're telling me, Gio, that the difference between misery and relief is just swapping one drink for another?" Giovanni laughed, shaking his head. "Yes, my friend, I didn't believe it either, but sometimes the body asks for something small. Not a battle, not a miracle. Just a swap." Pietro smirked but made a note to himself to try. Giovanni could see the curiosity behind his friend's eyes, the same curiosity that had once stirred in him. As days passed, Giovanni began to cherish the ritual. The act of warming a drink, of holding the cup between his palms, became more than habit. It was a kind of prayer, a way of honoring his body's needs. He no longer saw it as weakness to admit his body had changed. Instead, he saw it as wisdom, the kind of wisdom only years of living could teach. "We learn when we are children to listen to our parents," he thought one evening, staring into the steam rising from his cup. "Now, in age, we must learn to listen to ourselves." The relief spread beyond his sleep. His mornings grew brighter, his walks longer, his patience deeper. He noticed how even the taste of food seemed sharper, more alive, when he wasn't dulled by exhaustion. He noticed how laughter came easier, how the sound of birds outside his window felt like music again. These were small things, perhaps, but they filled him with gratitude. All from a swap, he marveled, shaking his head in wonder. Lucia, ever his companion, encouraged him gently. She reminded him to prepare his drinks early, to take time with them, to see them not as remedies, but as companions. "It isn't just the milk or the broth," she told him one evening as she poured her own tea. "It is the way you slow down for it. That is what your body craves too." Giovanni nodded, realizing she was right. The swap was not only in the cup, it was in his pace, his approach, his willingness to meet the night with tenderness instead of resistance. One Sunday, his daughter and her family came for lunch. At the table, Giovanni spoke of his discovery, and his granddaughter Sofia leaned close, her curious eyes wide. "Nonno," she asked, "is it really that easy? Just changing your drink?" Giovanni smiled and brushed her cheek with his hand. "Sometimes, little one, the biggest relief comes from the smallest changes. You'll see one day." She nodded solemnly, as though storing away a secret for the future. In that moment, Giovanni realized his journey was not only about finding rest for himself, but about leaving a gentle lesson for those he loved. The nights were not flawless, some evenings still brought restlessness, and there were mornings when he woke weary, but even then the despair was gone. He no longer felt trapped in an endless cycle of frustration. Instead, he felt like a man on a path, moving slowly but steadily toward peace. That knowledge itself was a kind of relief, greater than he had expected. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Giovanni stood in his garden and thought about the long journey of his life. He remembered the heavy work of his youth, the nights of worry when his children were small, the seasons that had passed so quickly. He realized that life had always been about adjustments, about learning to bend without breaking. This small swap, so simple, so humble, was just another adjustment, another way of bending with grace. And in it, he found not only sleep, but dignity. That night, as he sipped his warm drink and climbed into bed, Giovanni whispered to himself, "Relief doesn't have to be grand. Sometimes it's just one cup, one choice, one moment of kindness." And with that thought, he closed his eyes, no longer dreading the night, but welcoming it, ready to rest. Giovanni had grown used to the idea that water no longer served him at night. But the question still lingered. What could replace it? He didn't want to turn to pills. He had seen too many friends grow dependent on little bottles, trading one kind of misery for another. He wanted something natural, something that felt like it belonged to him, to his evenings, to the rhythm of his life. The answer came quietly, in the form of a warm, pale cup placed before him by Lucia one evening. "Try this," she said gently. "It may help you more than you think." He lifted the cup, surprised by the nutty aroma. "Almond milk," she explained. Giovanni had always been skeptical of it. To him, milk came from cows, creamy, familiar, a staple of his childhood. Almond milk felt modern, almost strange, but Lucia had read about it, how it was gentler on the stomach, rich in magnesium and tryptophan, both allies of rest. Giovanni hesitated, then took a sip. It was lighter than cow's milk, with a delicate sweetness, soothing rather than heavy. As he swallowed, warmth spread through him, not just in his body, but in his spirit. That night, something shifted. He still woke once, but not with the jarring urgency he had come to dread. Instead, his body stirred lightly, then drifted back into rest, as if lulled by an unseen hand. In the morning, Giovanni felt something unfamiliar. He felt refreshed. Not perfectly, not completely, but more than he had in months. He sat at the breakfast table humming, and Lucia smiled knowingly. "So, did it help?" she asked. Giovanni nodded slowly, as though afraid the magic might vanish if he admitted it too openly. "It was different," he said, "gentler, like my body was finally willing to rest." The next evening, he asked for it again. This time, he prepared it himself, warming the almond milk carefully, watching the steam rise from the small saucepan. He stirred it slowly, remembering the doctor's words about magnesium calming the nerves, tryptophan turning into serotonin, then melatonin. It felt almost ceremonial, a quiet offering to his body. When he carried the cup to the table, he sat in silence, savoring each sip. He noticed how the warmth eased the tension in his shoulders, how his thoughts seemed less restless. He began to see that sleep was not something to chase, but something to welcome. And this drink had become part of the welcome. One evening, when his daughter visited, Giovanni shared the secret with her. "Your mama made me try almond milk," he said with a smile. "At first I thought it was foolish, but now I see it as a gift. It helps me rest." His daughter laughed softly, teasing him about finally catching up with modern habits. But her eyes shone with relief. "Papa, anything that helps you sleep is a blessing," she said. And Giovanni realized then that his journey was not just about himself. It was about the people who loved him, the family who worried when they saw him worn and weary. Resting well was not only his gift to himself, but also to them. Night after night, The ritual deepened. Giovanni discovered that adding a pinch of cinnamon made the drink even more comforting, a warmth that lingered long after the last sip. Sometimes he sprinkled nutmeg, remembering how his grandmother used it in custards. Each small touch became a thread connecting past and present, weaving memory into his nightly routine. It was no longer just a drink, it was a story in a cup, carrying him toward sleep with familiarity and comfort. Lucia, too, noticed the change. She saw him move more lightly in the mornings, his patience restored, his laughter returning. "You are more yourself again," she told him one morning as they worked side by side in the garden. Giovanni looked at her, gratitude welling in his chest. "Perhaps all I needed was comfort," he said softly, "not force." And in those words, he understood something deeper. Sleep was not a battle to win, but a gift to receive. And almond milk had become his way of opening his hands. One evening, he invited his old friend Pietro over. They sat at the table, talking as they always did, about the past, about family, about aches and pains that came with age. Giovanni poured 2 small cups of almond milk, offering one to Pietro. "Try," he said. Pietro raised an eyebrow but accepted. As they sipped together, Giovanni shared his story of restless nights and the simple swap that had begun to change everything. Pietro listened, quiet for once, then nodded slowly. "Maybe there is wisdom in small things after all," he admitted. Giovanni smiled, feeling not only relief for himself, but hope for others. The nights were not perfect. Sometimes the old restlessness returned, tugging at him in the dark. But the despair was gone. He no longer felt helpless, no longer believed that sleeplessness was his fate. He had found a tool, a companion, something to steady him through the long hours, and even in the imperfect nights, he carried hope, knowing that he was no longer alone in his struggle. One night, as Giovanni sat by the window with his warm cup in hand, he looked out at the moon hanging above the rooftops. The world was quiet, the streets empty, the air cool. He thought about how many people must be awake like him, staring at ceilings, hearts heavy with frustration. He wished he could reach out to them, place a warm cup in their hands, and say, "Here, try this. Let it comfort you." The thought filled him with tenderness, a sense of connection to others who shared his struggle. When he finally climbed into bed, Giovanni whispered to Lucia, "You were right. Sometimes the answer is not to fight, but to comfort." She smiled sleepily, squeezing his hand, and as he closed his eyes, the warmth of almond milk still in his body, Giovanni felt not just sleep approaching, but peace. Though almond milk had brought Giovanni comfort, there were still nights when his body lay quiet, but his mind would not. He would close his eyes only to feel thoughts tumbling over one another, memories of work left undone, worries for his grandchildren's future, questions about his own health. It was as if his brain refused to dim the lights, insisting on rehearsing every worry in the stillness of night. More than once, he found himself sitting up in bed, staring into the dark, whispering, "Why won't you let me rest?" One such night, Giovanni sat at the table with his head in his hands, a candle flickering before him. Lucia came in quietly, tying her robe. She had watched him struggle too many times to be surprised. Without a word, she filled the kettle, the sound of water filling the silence. A few minutes later, she set a steaming cup in front of him. "Chamomile," she said softly. "My mother used to make it for me when I was restless. Maybe it will help you too." Giovanni frowned slightly. Tea at night? Wouldn't that only keep him awake? But the look in Lucia's eyes was tender, insistent, and he lifted the cup. The floral scent rose gently, calming before he even tasted it. The first sip was delicate, almost sweet without sugar. It carried a warmth that spread slowly, like sunlight through a window. He sat quietly, cupping the drink in his hands, letting the steam soften his face. Something about it felt safe, almost familiar, though he hadn't tasted chamomile in years. By the time he finished, his chest felt lighter, and when he lay down, he noticed his thoughts had slowed, not vanished, but softened, as though the edges had been dulled. That night, for the first time in weeks, he fell asleep without the exhausting battle against his own mind. In the morning, Giovanni admitted, almost sheepishly, that the tea had helped. It was like, "My thoughts were willing to be quiet," he told Lucia over breakfast. She smiled knowingly, placing her hand on his. Sometimes the mind needs a friend, not a fight. Her words stayed with him. He had always tried to conquer his thoughts, to silence them with force. But chamomile showed him a gentler way, an invitation rather than a command. The following evening, Giovanni made the tea himself. He placed the bag in hot water, watching the pale golden color bloom in the cup. As it steeped, he breathed in the steam, noticing how even the ritual calmed him. When he carried it to the table, he sat in silence, sipping slowly, feeling his body unclench, his jaw loosen, his shoulders drop. It was not a magic potion, not a sudden cure, but a gentle nudge like Lucia's hand on his arm when she wanted to guide him across a crowded street. It told his body, "You are safe. You may rest now." One evening, Giovanni's daughter came by with her children, and they stayed late. After the children were tucked into bed, she found her father in the kitchen preparing his tea. Curious, she asked, "Papa, does that really help you sleep?" Giovanni chuckled, stirring the cup. "It doesn't force me, no, but it invites me. It slows my mind, makes me less stubborn against sleep, and sometimes that's all we need." She kissed his cheek, smiling. "Maybe I should try it too. My mind races at night as well." Giovanni realized then that sleeplessness was not only the problem of the old, it was a human burden at every age. In the cafe the next week, Giovanni mentioned chamomile to his friends. They laughed at first, teasing him for drinking flowers. But when he described the way his restless thoughts softened, even Pietro leaned closer. "I lie awake with my heart racing," Pietro admitted. "Perhaps flowers are stronger than they look." They all laughed, but Giovanni could see hope spark in their eyes, just as it had in his. The nights that followed brought Giovanni more peace. Sometimes, when he felt his mind starting to spin as he prepared for bed, he would already know what to do. He filled the kettle, steeped the tea, and sat quietly while the world slowed around him. He noticed how the act itself was as important as the drink, the patience of waiting for the water to cool, the deliberate choice to sit still, the mindful sipping. It was not just about calming the brain, but about telling his entire self, "The day is done." Lucia began joining him, pouring her own cup of chamomile. They would sit together in the dim light, saying little, the silence between them filled with ease. Giovanni found these moments precious. They reminded him of their younger days when they would sit outside under the stars, holding hands without needing to speak. Now, instead of stars, they had steam rising from golden cups, but the feeling was the same: togetherness, calm, a quiet surrender to night. There were still occasional restless nights, of course. Sometimes Giovanni's worries returned, strong and insistent, but now he had a way to meet them. Instead of lying in bed, fighting his thoughts, he rose gently, brewed a cup, and let chamomile remind him that he did not have to win every battle. He only had to soften, to allow. And more often than not, he found himself drifting back into sleep, not with frustration, but with gratitude. One night, as Giovanni finished his tea and climbed into bed, he whispered to Lucia, "It feels like this drink listens to me, as though it understands my mind." She smiled in the darkness. "Perhaps it does. Nature often knows what we forget." Giovanni closed his eyes, holding on to her words. Yes, he thought, perhaps this little flower carried wisdom far beyond its size. And with that thought, he surrendered, his racing mind finally quieted. Giovanni had begun to accept that his nights were not ruined by a single cause, but by many small shifts working together. His restless mind, his aging hormones, his habits that no longer suited him. The almond milk brought comfort, the chamomile brought calm. Yet there was still one intruder that seemed impossible to banish, the call of his bladder. It was often the same pattern. He would fall asleep peacefully, only to be jolted awake by the urge to rise. The bathroom trips were not always urgent, but they were insistent, enough to pull him out of deep sleep. And once he returned to bed, he found the silence too sharp, the rhythm of sleep broken. "It is like having a child again," he joked to Lucia one morning, weary after a night of 2 trips. "Except this time, the child is my own body crying for attention." She laughed gently, but her eyes carried concern. One afternoon, while walking through the market, Giovanni stopped at Marco's stall again. The old friend had a knack for listening as much as for selling. Giovanni shared his frustration, and Marco leaned on the counter thoughtfully. "Have you tried coconut water?" he asked. Giovanni raised an eyebrow. "Coconut water? That is for the beach, Marco, not for the night." Marco smiled. "Not cold, not fresh from the bottle. Warm it gently, dilute it. It carries minerals, potassium, magnesium, that steady the bladder and calm the nerves. My wife swears by it when her sleep is broken." Giovanni scoffed at first, but curiosity gnawed at him. That evening, Lucia warmed a small cup, adding just a slice of ginger as Marco had suggested. Giovanni held it suspiciously. Coconut water in winter felt unnatural. Yet when he took his first sip, he was surprised. The warmth softened its sweetness, and the ginger added a gentle heat that lingered in his chest. He finished the small cup slowly, uncertain if it would make any difference. That night, the change was subtle but powerful. He still woke once, but without the sharp urgency that usually dragged him from bed. His bladder seemed quieter, less insistent. He rose, relieved himself calmly, and returned to bed without the restless storm that usually followed. Within minutes, he was asleep again. In the morning, Giovanni felt a spark of wonder. "It worked," he whispered to himself, almost afraid to say it aloud. For the next 3 nights, he repeated the ritual. Each time, the same result. Fewer interruptions, gentler awakenings, easier returns to sleep. By the 4th morning, Giovanni was convinced. He sat at breakfast with Lucia and declared, "Coconut water may be stranger than milk or tea, but it speaks to my body in ways water never did." She smiled, pouring her own tea. Perhaps your body needed not just comfort, not just calm, but balance. As days passed, Giovanni realized the difference balance made. The minerals in the coconut water seemed to soothe his legs, which no longer cramped as they once had. His bladder, once unpredictable, grew quieter. It was as though his body, long deprived of what it needed, was finally given back its voice. He found himself less anxious as bedtime approached, knowing he had an ally against the nightly intrusions. One Sunday after church, Giovanni shared his discovery with a neighbor, Signora Bianchi, who often complained of sleepless nights. "It sounds unusual," he admitted, "but coconut water, warmed and softened, has calmed my bladder. I wake less, and when I do, I return to sleep more easily." The elderly woman raised her eyebrows, intrigued. "Coconut water? At our age?" Giovanni chuckled. "At our age, we must learn to listen. Even strange things can become friends." The ritual soon became something he looked forward to. He would prepare it early, never right before bed, but an hour or two before, sipping slowly as the evening light faded. He discovered that the ginger not only warmed him, but settled his stomach, easing the heaviness of dinner. The act of sipping became as soothing as the drink itself, a reminder that patience was as important as the drink's minerals. Lucia often joined him, though she preferred chamomile. Together they sat in the quiet of their kitchen, steam rising from their cups, the room filled with a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. Sometimes they spoke of the past, sometimes they said nothing at all, letting the comfort of the ritual carry them toward night. Of course, not every night was perfect. Some evenings, Giovanni still woke, his body reminding him of its age. But the difference now was that he no longer felt betrayed. He felt cared for. Each sip of coconut water was a promise to himself, a way of saying, "I will not ignore you. I will give you what you need." And that small promise brought him more relief than he had ever expected. One evening, his granddaughter Sophia asked if she could taste it. She wrinkled her nose after a sip. "Too strange?" she giggled. Giovanni laughed, ruffling her hair. "Yes, strange, but sometimes strange is what saves us." He realized then how much he had learned from these little drinks, that life often asked him to embrace the unfamiliar, to step beyond habit, and in doing so, to find healing. That night, as Giovanni lay in bed, his body steady, his bladder calm, he whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. Not for coconut water itself, but for the chance to keep learning, to keep finding small ways to care for himself. He realized that aging was not an end to discovery, but an invitation to discover differently. And with that thought, he closed his eyes, drifting into sleep with a peace he once thought he had lost forever. Even with almond milk's comfort, chamomile's calm, and coconut water's balance, Giovanni still faced nights when sleep remained stubbornly distant. It wasn't his bladder, nor his restless mind this time. It was something deeper, something invisible. He would lie in bed, his body tired, but his heart beating as though a hidden hand was holding it awake. His chest felt restless, his thoughts humming without reason. "It is like my body does not know how to turn off," he confessed to Lucia one morning, frustration etched into his voice. Lucia, always observant, listened carefully. "Perhaps it is stress," she suggested gently. Giovanni shook his head. "But I do not feel stressed. My days are simple now. Garden, walks, family." Yet the truth was harder to see. Stress was not always a loud intruder. Sometimes it was a whisper, the steady presence of age, of responsibility, of fear that lingered even when unspoken. The doctor later confirmed this suspicion. Giovanni, he said, your cortisol levels may be high in the evening. It happens with age. Even if you don't feel anxious, your body may carry the tension. That keeps your heart alert, your mind awake. You need something to lower it, to remind your body that night is for rest. The advice left Giovanni thoughtful. That evening, Lucia handed him a new kind of drink, a golden cup that glowed in the dim light. This is what my grandmother used to make, she said. Turmeric milk. A pinch of black pepper makes it stronger. Giovanni lifted it, curious. The aroma was earthy, warm, unlike anything he usually drank. He sipped cautiously, and the flavor surprised him, comforting, with a gentle bite of spice at the back of his tongue. He finished slowly, feeling warmth bloom in his chest and spread through his body. That night, something remarkable happened. Giovanni lay in bed, expecting the usual tossing and turning, but instead, he felt his heartbeat slow, his breath deepen. His thoughts did not race, his chest did not flutter. Instead, his body seemed to sink into the mattress, surrendering more easily than before. He slept deeply, and when he woke, the light through the window told him morning had come without the usual interruptions. For the first time in months, he felt not only rested, but steady, as though a weight had lifted. In the days that followed, Giovanni embraced golden milk as part of his evening ritual. He learned to prepare it carefully, half a teaspoon of turmeric whisked into warm almond milk, a pinch of black pepper, sometimes a touch of cinnamon. The act itself became soothing. As he stirred the golden liquid, he imagined the stress leaving his body, the day melting away. He realized that what mattered most was not only the nutrients, but the ritual, the choice to set aside time for himself, to treat his body with care. Lucia watched him with quiet satisfaction. "You are calmer these days," she said one afternoon as they worked in the garden. Giovanni nodded. "It is as though the drink tells my body, enough now, it is time to rest." He laughed softly. "Strange that something so simple could quiet what I could never silence myself." She smiled, knowing well that often the simplest remedies carried the deepest wisdom. One evening, Giovanni invited his son to join him. His son, always rushing, always carrying the stress of work and family, laughed when Giovanni handed him the golden cup. "Papa, what is this? You've become an herbalist?" Giovanni chuckled. "Just try. You carry more stress than you admit. Let this remind you what calm feels like." His son sipped reluctantly, then paused, surprised by the warmth. Later, he admitted he had slept better than he had in weeks. Giovanni smiled with quiet pride, realizing that his journey was beginning to ripple outward, touching those he loved. The golden milk became more than a drink. It became a symbol, a reminder that rest was not a weakness, but a gift, that the body needed gentleness as much as strength. Giovanni began to look forward to the ritual, to the soft glow of the cup in his hands, to the way it seemed to tell his heart, "You may slow now." Even on nights when he still stirred, the drink anchored him, giving him confidence that sleep would return. Of course, there were evenings when Giovanni doubted. "Can a drink really change the weight of age?" he asked Lucia once. She took his hand, smiling. "It isn't only the drink, Gio. It is you choosing to care for yourself, to accept what your body needs. That choice is what brings you peace." Her words sank deep into him. She was right. It wasn't magic. It was kindness, and kindness, offered nightly, worked its quiet miracles. One late evening, Giovanni sat by the window with his golden cup, watching the moon rise. The glow of the drink mirrored the glow in the sky, and he felt a sense of connection between himself, the earth, and the quiet wisdom of age. He thought of the years he had spent working hard, pushing through, never stopping. And now, in this chapter of his life, he realized the lesson was different. Not pushing, but releasing. Not forcing, but allowing. Golden milk had taught him what he had forgotten, that even the strongest men need to let go. That night, as he finished his drink and lay beside Lucia, Giovanni whispered, "I think I am finally learning the language of sleep again." She squeezed his hand, her eyes closing with a smile. And for once, Giovanni closed his own eyes without fear, without resistance, sinking into rest as easily as a leaf falls into the river, quiet, natural, free. For weeks now, Giovanni had been slowly rebuilding his nights. Almond milk's gentle comfort, chamomile's quiet calm, coconut water's balance, and golden milk's release of stress. Each brought him closer to the rest he once thought lost forever. Yet there were still mornings when he woke with a subtle heaviness, as if sleep had visited but only lightly, brushing past him without staying long. He longed for something deeper, not just sleep, but the kind of heavy, dreamless rest he remembered from his younger days, when he could lay his head down and wake hours later without ever knowing the night had passed. One evening, as he sat in the doctor's office for a routine check, he mentioned this longing. "I sleep better now," Giovanni admitted, "but it is still fragile. I want to sink into rest and stay there, not float above it." The doctor smiled kindly. "Perhaps what you need is glycine. It's an amino acid that tells the brain to slow, that lowers the body's core temperature just enough for deep, dreamless sleep. You can find it in gelatin or in bone broth. Have you ever tried them before bed?" Giovanni raised an eyebrow. Bone broth? To him, broth belonged with winter meals, soups for sick days. The idea of drinking it before bed seemed odd. Yet curiosity had become his companion, and he promised to try. That evening, Lucia prepared a small pot of bone broth, simmering it gently until the kitchen filled with its rich aroma. She ladled a small portion into a cup, warm but not too heavy. Giovanni took it slowly, tasting the depth of flavor, the earthiness of bones and herbs. It was different from the lightness of tea or milk, grounding in a way that felt ancient, almost primal. He finished the cup and, to his surprise, felt not heavy but settled, as though his body had been anchored. That night, Giovanni slept as he had not in years. He remembered little of it. No tossing, no vivid dreams, no interruptions. When he woke, the sun was already bright and his body felt heavy in the best way, as though it had truly rested. He sat at the edge of the bed, stunned. "Lucia," he whispered, "I slept all the way through." She turned, smiling at him with quiet triumph. "Then perhaps we have found the secret you were searching for." In the days that followed, Giovanni experimented further. Some nights he used bone broth, other nights he dissolved a spoonful of gelatin into warm water, stirring until it vanished into a smooth drink. Both worked in their own way, delivering that deep stillness he craved. He discovered that it wasn't about the volume, but the ritual. Just a small cup, sipped slowly, enough to give his body the signal it needed. The effect was profound. His mornings grew brighter, his steps steadier, his mind clearer. One afternoon, his friend Pietro stopped by, complaining of fatigue. Giovanni listened, then offered him a small jar of powdered gelatin. "Try this before bed," he said. "It may give you the kind of rest you have forgotten." Pietro laughed, skeptical, but took it anyway. A week later, he returned with wide eyes. "Gio, I slept like a stone. Not even the cat waking me could break it." Giovanni smiled, pleased not only for himself, but for his friend. The discovery felt almost miraculous, yet Giovanni knew it was not magic. It was his body responding to what it had been missing all along. Glycine, the doctor explained, was like a key to the brain's deeper rhythms. And by restoring it through broth or gelatin, Giovanni was giving his body back the tools it once had in abundance. Each night, as he sipped the warm liquid, he felt a quiet gratitude, not just for the sleep itself, but for the way his journey had taught him to listen, to adapt, to embrace what once seemed strange. The ritual became precious. Sometimes Lucia joined him, sipping broth together in the quiet of the kitchen. They would talk about the day, about the grandchildren, about memories of their youth. The drink warmed not only their bodies, but their bond, turning the evening into something sacred. Giovanni began to see that his nights were no longer battles, but invitations to slow down, to care for himself, to share moments of peace with the woman who had walked beside him through every season. One night, after finishing his cup, Giovanni sat at the window and thought of all the men his age who lay awake, staring at ceilings, frustrated and weary. He wished he could reach them, offer them the same simple secret that had transformed his nights. If only they knew, he whispered to himself. If only they knew it doesn't have to be this way. The thought filled him with a sense of mission, a desire to share not only the drinks, but the hope they carried. The next morning, as he tended his garden, Giovanni felt lighter, stronger. His muscles responded more willingly, his back less stiff. He realized that rest was not just about the night, it was about giving the body the strength to face the day. Sleep had become his medicine, and gelatin or broth had become the messenger. And in that realization, he felt not only relief, but joy. That evening, he held his cup with reverence. "This," he told Lucia, "is not just broth. It is the doorway to the kind of rest I thought was gone forever." She nodded, smiling softly. "And now you see, sometimes the answers are not new. They are as old as the earth, waiting for us to remember. As Giovanni lay down that night, his body already humming with calm, he felt gratitude rise within him. Not just for the broth, not just for the sleep, but for the journey itself, the way each step had led him closer to peace, the way even age, with all its trials, had brought him back to wisdom he had once forgotten. And as he closed his eyes, he surrendered completely, sinking into the dreamless rest he had long prayed to find. Giovanni had come far in his journey. He no longer dreaded the nights as he once did. Almond milk brought him comfort, chamomile quieted his thoughts, coconut water steadied his bladder, golden milk soothed the hidden stress in his chest, and bone broth or gelatin carried him into dreamless depths. Each drink was like a tool in his hands, a gift that had returned sleep to him little by little. But even with these victories, there were nights when he stumbled, not because of what he drank, but because of how much. It happened one evening when he felt unusually thirsty. The day had been warm, and he had worked longer than usual in the garden. His back ached, his shirt damp with sweat, and by evening he craved relief. So instead of a small cup, Giovanni poured himself a large mug of almond milk, nearly double his usual portion. He drank it eagerly, believing that more comfort would surely mean more rest. Yet that night, he found himself waking twice, his bladder tugging him from bed as it once had before. He lay awake, frustrated, whispering into the darkness, "Why now, after all I've learned?" In the morning, he confessed his mistake to Lucia. She listened, her eyes kind but firm. "Even good things, Gio, must be taken with care. Too much can undo what too little could not fix." Her words reminded him of an old saying his father once used: "The right dose makes the medicine, the wrong dose makes the poison." Giovanni realized he had been so eager for relief that he had forgotten the lesson of balance. Later that week, during a checkup, Giovanni asked his doctor about it. The physician nodded knowingly. Liquids, even the best kinds, can still disturb the bladder when taken in large amounts before bed. The secret is not in more, Giovanni, it is in enough. Just a small portion, a quarter cup, 100 milliliters. Enough to soothe, enough to nourish, not enough to overflow. Giovanni nodded slowly, the truth sinking in. He had been learning all along that age was not about taking more from life, but about knowing how much to take and when. That evening, Giovanni prepared a smaller cup of golden milk, measured carefully, only a few sips compared to the large mug he had once poured. He drank slowly, savoring it as though it were something precious. When he climbed into bed, he noticed the difference. His body felt content, not overfilled. His bladder remained quiet. He slept deeply, and when he woke at dawn, it was with a sense of ease he hadn't known in years. The lesson was simple but profound. Enough is enough. Not too much, not too little. He realized that life itself mirrored this truth. In his younger days, he had chased more work, more money, more strength. But now, in this season of life, peace came from knowing when to stop, when to accept just enough. It wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. Giovanni began to treat his nightly drinks with reverence, almost like a ceremony. He measured carefully, never more than a small cup, never closer than an hour to bedtime. He treated each sip as a gift, not a demand. The restraint gave him more than he expected. It gave him confidence, the knowledge that he was not at the mercy of his sleeplessness, but in partnership with it. One evening, his granddaughter Sophia noticed him sipping slowly and asked, "No, why do you drink so little?" Giovanni smiled and tapped her nose. "Because, little one, the secret is not in how much, but in how wisely. Too much water will drown a plant. Too little, and it withers. The same is true for me." She giggled, nodding as though she understood, and Giovanni realized he was teaching her more than just a lesson about drinks. He was passing on a truth about life. At the cafe, when his friends asked about his improved sleep, Giovanni shared this lesson too. "We all think more is better," he told them, "but the body does not ask for more, it asks for balance. Just enough to soothe, not to flood." Pietro chuckled, raising his espresso cup. "Perhaps we should all learn to measure better, eh?" They laughed together, but Giovanni could see in their eyes that the truth had struck home. As weeks passed, Giovanni noticed the difference this new balance made in every part of his life. His mornings grew steadier, his garden work became easier, even his patience with Lucia's small habits, her humming while she cooked, her tendency to fuss over the plants, deepened. Enough, he realized, is not just about drinks, it is about how I live. I do not need more than I already have, I only need to notice it. One night, as he held his small cup of broth, Giovanni thought about the years he had wasted chasing more. More sleep, more strength, more certainty. Yet all along, peace had been waiting in enough. He smiled, lifting the cup to his lips, whispering, "This is enough." And with that, he lay down beside Lucia, closing his eyes without fear, letting the quiet of the night carry him into rest. Giovanni had learned much about what to drink at night and how much, but he began to notice something deeper. The drinks alone were not the whole secret. On nights when he rushed, when he gulped his almond milk after a heavy dinner or steeped chamomile while still distracted by the news, the results were weaker. But when he slowed down, when he treated the evening as a gentle descent rather than a hurried stop, his sleep grew richer. It dawned on him one evening as he sat by the window with his warm cup in hand. Sleep was not a door that slammed shut, but a path that needed to be walked. Lucia was the first to put words to it. "It isn't only the drink, Gio," she told him softly. "It's the way you arrive at the drink, the routine." He frowned at the thought but could not deny its truth. The evenings when he dimmed the lights early, turned off the television, and moved slowly through the small rituals of brushing his teeth, preparing his drink, and sitting quietly, those were the nights when his sleep was deepest. It was as though his body responded not just to nutrients but to signals. The day is over. It is time to let go. The realization made him think of his childhood. His mother would usher him and his siblings to bed with stories, lullabies, and the gentle rhythm of routine. He had not realized then that it was more than tradition. It was biology, teaching the body and mind to surrender. Somewhere along the years, he had lost that rhythm, replacing it with late-night television, heavy meals, and restless thoughts. But now, at 71, he saw the wisdom of his mother's simple ways. Age was not only about learning new tricks, it was about remembering the old ones. So Giovanni began to shape his evenings with care. He ate supper earlier, keeping it light, soup, bread, sometimes a few olives. Afterward, he would walk slowly through the garden, letting the air cool his skin, the scents of rosemary and basil calm his senses. Back inside, he would dim the lamps, put away his phone, and sit with Lucia, sharing a warm drink while the quiet settled around them. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they did not, but always they moved together toward the peace of night. By the time he reached his bed, his body already knew what was coming. Sleep no longer felt like a stranger. It felt like a guest he had prepared the house to welcome. One evening, his daughter noticed the difference when she came by to drop off some food. "Papa, your home feels peaceful," she said, stepping into the softly lit room. Giovanni smiled, handing her a cup of tea. "I've learned the night is like a guest," he explained. "If you welcome it with noise and clutter, it will not stay. But if you prepare, it enters gently." She laughed, hugging him. "You're becoming a poet in your old age." But Giovanni knew it wasn't poetry, it was truth. At the cafe, his friends began to notice the change in him too. "You look younger, Gio," Pietro remarked one morning. Giovanni laughed. "Not younger, just rested. I found my routine." His friends leaned in, curious as he described the small steps, dimming the lights, warming the drink, slowing down. "It isn't only about what we drink," he told them. "It is about telling the body, you are safe now, you may rest." They nodded thoughtfully, each man carrying away the image of evening not as an afterthought, but as a sacred ritual. The changes touched every part of Giovanni's life. His mornings grew lighter, his patience deeper, his laughter more frequent. He noticed the difference in small things, the way he hummed as he pruned the roses, the way he had energy to play a little longer with his grandchildren, the way he no longer dreaded the night but welcomed it. It wasn't perfection. He still had restless evenings, but the fear was gone. He no longer saw sleep as an enemy, but as a partner, and his routine was the bridge between them. Lucia, too, cherished the new rhythm. They shared evenings more closely now than they had in years. Sometimes they sat together in silence, the warmth of their cups in hand, listening to the quiet sounds of the neighborhood winding down. Sometimes they spoke of old memories, laughing softly at stories from their youth. The routine wasn't only about sleep, it was about connection, about savoring the moments that too often slipped by unnoticed. One night, as Giovanni sat with his cup of bone broth, he thought about how far he had come. Months earlier, he had been a man tormented by sleeplessness, weighed down by fatigue and frustration. Now, through small changes and gentle routines, he felt whole again. Perhaps this is what age is meant to teach, he thought. Not how to fight harder, but how to prepare better. not how to conquer, but how to welcome. Before climbing into bed, he whispered to Lucia, "You were right, it's the routine. Without it, even the best drink loses its power." She smiled, pressing her lips to his cheek. "And now you see, sleep is not just in the cup, Gio. It is in the way you walk toward it." That night, Giovanni lay down with ease, his body already softened by the ritual of the evening. He closed his eyes not with fear or frustration, but with peace, knowing that the path to rest had already been prepared. And as he drifted into slumber, he realized the perfect evening routine was not about perfection at all. It was about love, patience, and the quiet wisdom of slowing down. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Giovanni first realized just how much had changed. He woke to the sound of church bells in the distance, their chimes gentle, familiar. But what struck him most wasn't the bells, it was the fact that he had slept through the night without once waking in frustration. He sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his hands over his face, and felt an unfamiliar lightness. His body wasn't weighed down with the fog of exhaustion. His mind wasn't cluttered with the memory of long, restless hours. He turned to Lucia, who was just stirring, and whispered with awe, "It feels like I've been given a new body." The miracle, he realized, wasn't found in a pill or a complicated cure. It had come from something so small, so ordinary, a single cup before bed. One glass of almond milk, chamomile tea, coconut water, golden milk, or broth. Just one. Not too much, not too little. Each night, that glass had become the line between chaos and calm, between dread and peace. It wasn't the liquid alone, but the ritual, the care, the choice. And now, after months of practice, Giovanni could hardly believe the difference it had made. He thought back to the man he had been before, dragging himself through mornings, snapping at small annoyances, staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m. with a heart full of frustration. That man had felt old, truly old, in a way Giovanni had never accepted before. But now, as he moved through his days with more energy, tending his garden, laughing with his grandchildren, walking with Lucia through the cobblestone streets, he felt something different. Not younger exactly, but more alive. Sleep had returned to him, a kind of dignity he thought he'd lost. One evening, as he sat with his friend Pietro at the cafe, he tried to explain. "It's only a glass," he said, holding his hands out as though to show its size. "One small glass. That is all it took to change my nights." Pietro chuckled, skeptical as always. "A glass cannot change a life," Giovanni smiled knowingly. "Then you haven't tried. It isn't the glass alone, it is the choice behind it. The way it teaches the body to trust again." Pietro leaned back, quiet for a moment, then admitted, "You look different, Gio. Happier. Maybe I will try." Giovanni patted his friend's arm, hoping he would. The grandchildren noticed too. Sophia, always the most observant, said one afternoon, "Nono, you don't fall asleep in your chair as much anymore." Giovanni laughed, pulling her onto his lap. "That's because I finally learned how to sleep where I should, in my bed, through the night." She wrinkled her nose. "All because of a drink?" He nodded. "Yes, because of a drink. Sometimes the smallest things carry the biggest power." She thought for a moment, then whispered, "Like love?" Giovanni's heart swelled and he kissed her forehead. Yes, exactly like love. The truth of it amazed him. One small cup had rippled through every part of his life. Because he slept, he had energy. Because he had energy, he could laugh more, love more, forgive more. The nights had been stealing not only his rest, but his joy, his patience, his ability to live fully. Now, with this simple habit, he felt as though the thief had been driven out. What he gained back was not just sleep, it was life itself. Lucia noticed the change most of all. She had watched him suffer, had seen the shadow in his eyes when nights defeated him. Now she saw light return, a softness she thought had been buried under age. One evening, as they shared their warm drinks together, she said, "You are yourself again, Gio. I feel like I have my husband back." Giovanni looked at her, his chest tightening with gratitude. "Perhaps I had lost myself to sleeplessness," he admitted, "but you helped me find the way back with just one small glass." He realized then that the cup was more than a drink. It was a symbol of care, of patience, of humility. It reminded him that even in age, even in weakness, he could still choose. He could still make small changes that carried great meaning. He could still give himself what his body asked for. That realization brought him peace not only at night, but in every part of his life. At the cafe, he began sharing his story more openly. Men and women his age leaned closer, curious. It doesn't have to be this way, Giovanni told them. The nights don't have to steal from you. One small glass, something warm, something gentle, can make the difference. Some laughed, some doubted, but others tried. And weeks later, a few returned with gratitude, telling him they too had found relief. Giovanni smiled quietly each time, feeling as though he was passing on a secret gift, one cup at a time. One evening, as he sat by the window, holding his warm cup of bone broth, Giovanni thought about the arc of his journey, from despair to discovery, from frustration to peace. It struck him how close he had come to giving up, to believing that sleeplessness was his fate. But now, looking at the moon hanging in the sky, he felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for his body's resilience, for Lucia's wisdom, for the simple gift of one small glass. Before bed, he whispered a prayer. Thank you for this, for teaching me that even small things matter, for giving me back my nights, and with them, my life. Then he finished his drink, placed the cup on the table, and lay down beside Lucia. His body, already calm, welcomed the embrace of sleep, and as he drifted into rest, he thought, one glass, one difference, one life restored. The evening air carried a gentle coolness, the kind that drifts through open windows and makes curtains dance. Giovanni sat at his kitchen table, the lamp above casting a warm circle of light, and cradled his cup in both hands. Tonight it was chamomile, soft and fragrant, steam curling upward like a quiet promise. He watched the liquid shimmer and thought about the man he had been not so long ago, restless, exhausted, defeated by nights that refused to let him rest. And now, here he was, calmer, stronger, grateful for each evening that began with this simple ritual. Lucia moved softly around the kitchen, tidying dishes, humming a tune. She paused to touch his shoulder. Another cup? She asked with a smile. Giovanni lifted the drink in his hand. The last one for tonight, he said, but it feels like the first of a new life. Her eyes softened and she leaned down to kiss his temple. They didn't need to say more. She had walked with him through the shadows of sleeplessness, and now she walked beside him in the light of rest restored. Giovanni thought often about how close he had come to surrendering. There had been nights when he told himself, this is simply age. This is what growing old means, but he was wrong. Age did not demand despair. It only asked for gentleness, for listening, for small acts of care. A single cup before bed had shown him that healing was not about force, but about kindness. He had learned to meet his body where it was, not where he wished it to be. That shift had changed everything. One evening, his grandson Matteo came to visit. The boy, nearly a man now, slouched in his chair and confessed, No, I haven't been sleeping well. Too many late nights, too much on my mind." Giovanni smiled knowingly. "Then tonight," he said, pushing a cup toward him, "we begin." Matteo laughed. "What, with tea?" Giovanni nodded. "With tea, with a pause, with a choice, you'll see." Matteo sipped, skeptical but willing, and Giovanni felt a quiet pride. The ritual he had discovered was no longer only his, it was a gift he could pass on. As word spread among his friends at the cafe and neighbors in the village, Giovanni found himself sharing the same message again and again. Don't give up, tonight can be the start of peace. Some people doubted, of course, they wanted a grand solution, a dramatic cure. But Giovanni knew better now. He knew that real change often began small, so small it was almost invisible at first. A glass, a choice, a ritual repeated each night. And slowly, the body remembered how to rest. Slowly, life returned. The ripple of his discovery stretched further than he imagined. Friends who tried it returned weeks later with brighter eyes, calmer voices. "You were right, Gio," they told him. "It works. I sleep." Giovanni would only smile as though it were no surprise. Inside, though, he felt humbled. Humbled that something so simple could carry such power. Humbled that he had nearly overlooked it. Humbled that he could help others reclaim what had once been stolen from him. At home, his nights had become something sacred. The cup was no longer just a drink. It was a signal, a line drawn between day and night, between noise and silence. It told his body, now we rest, now we heal. And each morning he woke refreshed, ready to greet the sun, to tend his garden, to laugh with Lucia, to play with his grandchildren. He had gained not only sleep, but a sense of hope, the kind of hope that whispers, it is never too late to begin again. Lucia saw it too. One night as they sat together, cups in hand, she said softly, "You've changed, Giovanni. You're not only sleeping, you're living again." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I thought I was losing time," he admitted, "but sleep has given it back to me. Tonight, tomorrow, every day that follows, it all feels brighter now." She squeezed his hand, her eyes glistening. "Then promise me you'll keep this ritual. Promise me you'll keep choosing peace." Giovanni lifted his cup. "I promise." The bells of the village church rang in the distance, marking the hour. Giovanni stood, stretched, and felt the strength in his body, the calm in his mind. He carried his empty cup to the sink, rinsed it gently, and placed it on the counter. Then he turned to Lucia. "Shall we?" She smiled, taking his arm. Together they walked toward their bedroom, the soft lamplight fading behind them. As he lay down, Giovanni whispered into the quiet room, "Tonight could be the start of peaceful sleep for anyone willing to believe in it." His words floated like a prayer, not only for himself, but for every soul still wandering in the restless dark. For the neighbor who rose too often, for the friend who feared the night, for the grandchild learning the first rhythms of rest. He knew now that peace was possible. It only began with one choice, one glass, one night. And then everything changed. With a final breath of gratitude, Giovanni closed his eyes. Sleep came to him easily, softly, like an old friend returning home. When we first met Giovanni, he was a man at war with the night. Sleepless hours left him weary, his body heavy, and his spirit quietly sinking under the weight of fatigue. He believed, as so many do, that this was simply the price of age, that rest was something he could never truly reclaim. Yet what began as a single small choice, a cup in his hands before bed, slowly unraveled a truth he had forgotten. Healing does not always come with force, but with gentleness. Through almond milk, chamomile, coconut water, golden milk, bone broth, and mindful balance, Giovanni rediscovered the rhythm of rest. Each step was not just about what he drank, but about what he learned: patience, restraint, gratitude, and the wisdom of enough. Along the way, his family noticed, his friends were inspired, and he himself became a quiet beacon of hope. He had not only restored his sleep, but also reclaimed his joy, his energy, and his faith that change was still possible. And that is the message for you. It is never too late to begin again. Tonight, you hold the same choice Giovanni did: to believe in something small, to honor your body with kindness, and to invite peace back into your nights. Aging does not mean surrendering to exhaustion. It means finding new ways to live fully, gently, wisely. So let tonight be your beginning. One cup, one breath, one decision to trust that peace is possible. Like Giovanni, you may wake tomorrow not only rested, but renewed, with the quiet confidence that even in this season of life, transformation is still within your reach.